As I mentioned before Mass, I'd like to talk about this current situation surrounding the Kamloops Indian Residential School with a view towards truth and reconciliation. Keep in mind that I'm addressing only you, the parishioners of St. Anthony, whose spiritual care is entrusted to me. Some people have asked my own personal thoughts about it, so I'm going to do so briefly. This photo of an impromptu gathering at St. Mary's in Chilliwack on May 30th, it means a lot to me because I was assigned to St. Mary's from 2006 to 2008. The people there honored the 215 children who had died in Kamloops. They gave speeches and grieved. And their gathering brings back good memories for me, ministering to the First Nations Catholics in Chilliwack. And I remember hearing their long-standing pain. So to see them hurting now hurts me again. My mind has also gone back to the year 2009 when Chief Phil Fontaine, he went to Rome to meet Pope Benedict. I remember when I heard that story and following it, being so happy for the First Nations peoples. They needed and deserved that meeting. They needed to hear that the Holy Father loves them and that he was sorry for what the Catholics did to them. And that happiness and peace is what I want for them again. A few other thoughts. We have brought this upon ourselves by being unfaithful to Jesus. I'm also shocked how some Catholics could have accepted having children forcibly taken from their parents. That's against the natural law. I'm surprised how anyone didn't see that then. And finally, even though the federal government and others are involved in residential schools, we are held to a higher standard because we are Jesus' church. Our lens for looking at the residential schools and the other issues will be today's gospel about the disciples in the boat being tossed about by the waves. Now, there are some people who are not tossed about by waves. And these are the people who have been focused on the truth of the residential schools for a long time. They've been advocating for healing, records being released, even asking Pope Francis to apologize. But many people, including some of us, are not focused on truth. We're focused on what's expedient. Here are some examples. The first statement of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops on May 31st was expedient, but beyond sorrow, prayers, and a pledge to seek reconciliation, it didn't offer anything concrete. Compare that with Archbishop Miller's statement. It was clear in 5 areas of action and accountability. And I'm not just saying that because he's my superior, I'm saying it because I think it's true. On the other hand, there was a priest in his homily who expressed great empathy for First Nations people, and he said many things that are true. But at the end, he complained about the church teachings that he disagrees with. That's expedient. To do that is very popular with our culture, but it doesn't help healing. Another example. Many people focus on the horrors of residential schools like it's something new. That's expedient. But the Truth and Reconciliation Commission since 2008 has been advocating for 94 calls to action. And 6 months ago, Commissioners Chief Wilton Littlechild said, "I'm encouraged by what I've seen going on across the country. But on the other hand, we're collectively quite concerned that it's been moving too slow." Why hasn't anyone been following that story 6 months ago? Another example, people express outrage. They want the church to apologize, but every diocese that had residential schools and all religious orders that were involved, they apologized decades ago. And in recent days, they have renewed those apologies. Now, if people are asking the Sisters of St. Anne or the Oblates of Mary Immaculate to release records, or if they're asking Pope Francis to come to Canada and apologize, then be specific. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in 2018 asked Pope Francis to come and apologize. That's a fair request. I think it would be healing. But in the midst of outrage, dispersed in so many different directions, and some of these directions are not true, these good requests get lost. Some things that aren't true, for example, it's been shown that people who have followed the residential schools for a long time, they've always known about these graves of children at these schools. And secondly, the Kamloops school did not have a mass grave. What I am criticizing is the bandwagon mentality, where people join the latest trendy cause, and the focus is not on truth or reconciliation. I question how many of us really care about the First Nations peoples and their healing. Well, we do care, but it doesn't seem to last very long. Let's root ourselves in the gospel about Jesus, because Jesus is truth. It says, "And leaving the crowd behind, they took Jesus with them in the boat, just as he was. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion." Jesus shows perfect trust in God the Father, because in Scripture, when you have a good night's sleep, that's a sign of perfect trust. So Jesus is in the boat, he's being tossed about by the waves, but they don't disturb him. Now let's make a distinction. Evil should disturb us. It should still shock us that children were forcibly taken from their parents' homes, abused, forbidden to speak their native language, practice their traditions. But hearing these things should not move us into a frenzy. Frenzy asks, how could God allow this? As if that's a new question. Evil has always been going on: the Holocaust, Cultural Revolution in China, the Holodomor in Ukraine. But when things are going well in our lives, no one asks this question. Why not? If we're serious about finding the answer to this question, why don't we ask it when things are going well in our lives? Frenzy means writing things on social media, such as, "Why isn't the church apologized?" and then a day later saying, "Oh, here's their apology." Frenzy means going along with the latest trendy moral cause. Now, we should stand up against evil, but something is questionable when our focus of attention changes every year. Right now, it's residential schools. In 2020, it was George Floyd and Black Lives Matter. In 2019, the impeachment of President Trump. In 2018, wildfires in California making climate change the big focus. Do you remember in 2015 when the famous photo of a young Syrian boy, a refugee, his body washed up on the shore? Everyone was mobilized, and the Syrian civil war and helping refugees became an election issue in the Canadian federal election. The Syrian civil war has been going on for 10 years. It's still going on, but no one's focused on it anymore. What will come next? What will take our attention away from finding truth and reconciliation regarding the First Nations peoples? And so, do we really care? If there's a spike in COVID cases, we will turn our attention away from this. If there is a school shooting, our next focus will be gun control. In the letter to the Ephesians, St. Paul writes about reaching spiritual maturity, quote, "so that we may no longer be children, tossed back and forth, and carried about with every wind of doctrine, by the cunning of men, by their craftiness and deceitful wiles." And that's how many of us are. We're tossed about by the latest tragedy. Have you heard the term outrage culture? Outrage culture. At New York University, psychologist Jay Van Bavel and his team analyzed more than 500,000 tweets, specifically those that used moral and emotional language. He found that lots of words generate outrage, profanities, words like hate, war, greed. For every moral, emotional word that people use in a tweet, they found that it increased the rate of retweeting from other people who saw it by 15 to 20%. People know this. The media knows this. That's why, quote, "sometimes anger seems to be the whole point. Anger draws internet clicks, which is to say that many people now have a motive or even a business model for getting you mad. The only way to stay strong and to achieve true healing and reconciliation is to stay rooted in truth, which is Jesus Christ. In 1996, Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger wrote, "Relativism has thus become the central problem for the faith at the present time." The central problem for the faith is still relativism, which says that there's no truth, that there are no moral absolutes. And that's why at St. Anthony's, we always talk about abortion, the #1 cause of death in the world, even when no one else talks about it. But other injustices should also be fought, even when they're not trendy. Last June, I mentioned the sins of Catholics with respect to Vatican scandals, the sex abuse crisis, and residential schools. Why? Because I thought it was right. Even though they weren't big stories then, I knew people were still hurting from them, and that it was right to acknowledge the tremendous evil done by Catholics in residential schools. And this brings us back to the gospel. "And they woke him up and said to him, 'Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?' He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, 'Peace, be still.' Then the wind ceased and there was a dead calm. He said to them, 'Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?'" What kind of faith is Jesus talking about? I'll give you 3 aspects of it. First, belief that Jesus is God. When Jesus calms the storm, he didn't ask God the Father to do it. He did it himself because Jesus is God. When scandals like this in the residential schools, when scandals like this erupt, is your faith shaken? Why? I don't understand why. Did Jesus ever promise that there would be no scandals? Since when is our faith based on bishops? I feel the need to tell those of you who have been in our parish for a number of years now, your faith has to mature. Every year since I've been here, I've given at least 1 homily a year on scandals in the church, saying that this has been going on since the time of apostles. Second aspect, if we believe in Jesus, then we'll believe in the church because he founded her. I have covered this in other homilies. It's too convenient for people to say, "I believe in Jesus, but I don't believe in the church." How can you say you love the king, but you don't love his kingdom? The most common subject of Jesus' parables, of his teaching, was the kingdom of God. We are not Catholic because of the Pope or because of how other Catholics act. We are Catholic because it's Jesus' church. Do you remember the dream of St. John Bosco that I told you about, where the ship, the church, is represented as a ship? And the goal was to get this ship between 2 pillars, a pillar of the Eucharist and a pillar of Mary. When someone leaves the Catholic Church, they leave the Eucharist, which is Jesus, and they lose, and the devil wins. It's very understandable that survivors of abuse by priests and sisters would leave the church. They're so wounded, they need to get away from anything that's connected to their suffering. But what's truly amazing is when survivors choose to remain Catholic. And what's even more amazing is when they stay close to Jesus while at the same time criticizing what should be criticized and speaking up and holding bishops and priests accountable. 3, faith is reasonable, not just emotional. I've mentioned before that we live in the age of feelings. If medieval times was the age of faith and then came the so-called age of reason, we now live in the age of feelings. And so our faith is primarily guided by how we feel. Why do we sometimes skip our prayer? We say, because it's hard. Why do we give up? Because we feel discouraged. Why do media stories move us into frenzy? Because we think with our feelings. In April, I mentioned that faith is rational, that it's rooted in evidence. We believe in Jesus and the church because the evidence points us there, and then we choose to trust. And when our shepherds let us down and we're disappointed, our faith remains firm. Jesus wants us to be persons of faith, which means that we acknowledge that He is God, trust in Him, obey His teachings, love like Him, and seek the truth. That's the only way we'll survive. This is our choice, and I'd ask you to talk to Jesus about it, to ask Him for grace, and then tell Him your decision. I'm inviting you today to make a jump from an immature faith to a mature faith, an adult faith. And if we do, we'll be more rooted in truth. And when some of our friends and colleagues and family members say things about the residential school and they say to us, man, the Catholic Church has done so much evil, then agree with them because it's partially true. But I would say, yeah, but let's be specific. Many Catholics have done evil things, not all. Always agree with the truth. If you do, you have nothing to be afraid of. And if they go on and on about our faults, if it's true, then agree with them. And if it's false, then disagree. And if someone says, then why are you still Catholic? Then tell them the truth, because Jesus is God and He founded the Catholic Church. In 2005, Pope Benedict XVI said, an adult faith is not a faith that follows the trends of fashion and the latest novelty. A mature adult faith is deeply rooted in friendship with Christ. It is this friendship that gives us a criterion by which to distinguish the true from the false. We must develop this adult faith, and it is this faith that creates unity and is fulfilled in love. At that impromptu gathering in Chilliwack on May 30th, I saw faith, truth, and steps towards healing and justice. Father Juan Luca, he apologized on behalf of the church. He talked to each person there individually, apologizing, thanking them for persevering, and sharing their story. One of the First Nations women there said, we're not angry at anybody in particular, even God or even the institution itself. What happened back then, those were people that did those bad things. That was not God. With all of you that came, we see you. We know that we have allies now in the non-Native community. We can't do this without your support. Stand with us, please. These atrocities have to be brought to light. We have to acknowledge it, and we have to do better. Keep on following the needs of the First Nations peoples, not just when it's in the news, but into the future, and do what you can in your life situation to help. We must root ourselves in Jesus, keep the faith, and love like Him, and that will lead to truth and reconciliation.